I grew up with stories about aliens on Mars and unexplained objects in our solar system. But the truth was stranger than I knew. On Enceladus, we found a race of alien worms who can erase human memory. Now we're at war, and I'm going to see if we can win this fight and take back the memories of the people we love. Episode 2: Castaway. Part 1: Waking Up. Carl Steldahl had been permitted extra sleep after his first day on Enceladus. Presently, he was not on the iceberg, but instead on the equally large support vehicle which trailed behind it. The troops called it the hauler. The main disadvantage of the ice-crawling hauler was that it was far slower than the iceberg. When the two were attached, the iceberg could only travel at half speed. That was why it was presently detached and immobile on a fairly safe area of the planet's surface. Carl was still waking up as he left his bunk and tried to locate food. Mess hall, where's the mess hall?" he asked. The troops' eating area and kitchen was on the bottom level of the hauler, but accessed from a stairwell at the front. For the half-sleeping Steldahl, it was a maze to find it. He passed near the showers, still asking for the mess hall. He was pointed in the right direction. He walked to the back of the ship and opened a wide set of double doors. Tables for 100 and a spectacular view opened up in front of him. Unlike the utilitarian front of the hauler, the mess hall at the rear had unobstructed, wrap-around windows. It was also very close to the ice, so the horizon could be seen stretching out 20 kilometers away. And the food smelled amazing. His 8-month trip from Earth had been a monotonous 10-meal affair every week with only 2 drinks. The iceberg convoy had every canned, dried, and powdered food available in the solar system. Steldahl started with pancakes and hot apple cider. It was a nice morning. After breakfast, Steldahl put on his pressure suit and got his orders from the node. It was the control and data center of the hauler. He was supposed to be on the roof in 1 hour for a transport to the iceberg. The remainder of the orders just said, "for extended training and missions." Carl took a bathroom break, checked over his equipment, and put on his helmet. Finding the roof was easy. He just had to go up. Surprisingly, the landing pad on the roof was transparent. Active glass used a low current of electricity to increase strength, produce heat, and even cast light. Several soldiers were already lined up to take the transport over to the iceberg. When Steldahl reached the airlock, he told the supervising sergeant about his orders. "I'm supposed to take the 11:30 transport," Steldahl said, pointing to his wrist computer. "Nope," the sergeant said. "You're leaving now. That's an order." A dropship was just descending onto the roof pad, throwing up whirls of exhaust. Steldahl flipped down his visor and saluted the sergeant. He passed through the airlock and ran to catch his flight. When Steldahl arrived at the iceberg, he was also disoriented. Its important passages were often very small and unmarked. Steldahl guessed his way to the second level, where he found the science lab and medical center. He was surprised to see Colonel Frost arguing with a doctor. "We can't send that power core without a dropship," Frost declared. The scientist countered, "Just send a medevac." "And it needs an armed escort," Frost rebutted. "You have lots of soldiers, don't you?" the doctor pleaded. "Not for low-priority escorts. You'll get your trip in 10 days." maybe a week. Steldal cut in. I can go. Frost was not pleased and gave a commanding officer's greeting. Name and rank, soldier. Steldal, Carl, private, sir, he said, snapping a salute. I'll be blunt, Private, Frost said. This is a 72-hour, low-speed flight to an unmanned science post. It will be another 5 days before you will be picked up by a DFD patrol and returned as cargo. I would consider this mission to be a punishment for most in my rank and file. Steldal replied, I'm very familiar with punishment, sir. Frost yielded. All right, Private. Unless your CO needs you to de-ice something, you get to snuggle up in a 1-meter-high triage compartment with a neutronium power core. A what? Steldal was curious about science. He wasn't extremely bright, but he had a sort of fascination with it. His academic skills were lackluster, but he was fascinated at how science could make bizarre declarations which were somehow unquestionably true. In this case, he was escorting a modest-looking black dome-shaped box which could theoretically melt a hole in the moon. But aside from the claims, Steldal knew science was their only shot at winning the war on Enceladus. He wanted to be a part of that, at least before he had spent the first half hour with his humming box friend. 14 hours into the flight, and finally something happened. The automated alert sounded. Vent diversion 1. The small ship listed to the right. Woohoo! Went Steldal. The motion was slow and smooth. The alert sounded again. Vent diversion 2. The ship rumbled slightly for a few moments. That wasn't so bad, Steldal said. The alert sounded again. Vent diversion Tango 6. Steldal had enough time to say, His ship plummeted 500 feet to avoid a cone of ice shards, propelled at 300 feet per second. An ice plume ejected directly beneath the medical transport, peppering its starboard belly with a layer of freezing water. The ship began to lose its balance, tilting to the right. In another 60 seconds, heaters would melt the ice off of the ship's skin. 60 seconds never came. Steldal felt death surround him. Steldal's ship dove and hit the ice in a spinning belly flop. When he awoke, he was surrounded by deflating emergency bags. His suit was sound, but there was blood in his mouth. The air pressure in the compartment was still intact. With a couple of hours of repair, the ship might even fly again, he thought. He knew that he was, statistically, lucky to be alive, but he also knew he had to salvage the mission. That was when he heard the sound, an angry ocean sound. From far beneath the ship, there would be a low whoosh, then a sudden loud whoosh, like a valve opening up. Quiet whoosh, loud whoosh. Steldal heard the quiet whoosh gradually growing louder below him. He swallowed a lump in his throat. Ice tore an event around the ship, flipping it upside down with Steldal inside. When he awoke, he was on his belly, but on the ceiling. It took him a moment to get his bearings. The ship was on its back. Ominously, there was another rumbling sound coming from deep below him. He needed to get out, but also to safeguard his mission. He looked for the power core and panicked when he couldn't find it. Then he looked up. Apparently mocking Steldal's reliance on gravity, the power core was still magnetically locked to the same place as it had always been, and it had fared better than both he and the ship which carried them. The private disengaged the lock and pulled both the core and himself free of the overturned ship. Then, finding a safe area a few meters away, Steldal sat with the core and caught his breath. But the rumbling beneath the ship, again, turned into a locomotive howl. In a slanted curtain of white, the ship was shot far off into the east horizon, impacting the ice with a scattering of debris. Ice plumes on Enceladus, apparently, also vented at extreme angles. Steldal was now a castaway, sworn to protect a black dome-shaped box with a blinking light on it. Part 2. Scattered. Lost in contemplation, Steldal was staring at the field of debris, which stretched about 5 kilometers long, with some smoldering bits here and there. With only his internal air pack, he had 6 hours of air left. Walking and carrying his power core friend, he might only have 4 hours of air. This wasn't tanning on the beach. His body would be heaving carbon dioxide as he descended the intervening slope and zigzagged around the debris field. And why the zigzagging? Because in some places there would be air canisters, and in other places there would not. Also was the issue of his neutron bomb friend. Although only 40 pounds, it was not designed into an infantry load harness, balanced on his shoulders and stabilized with lumbar support. No, it was just a box. A box that was a pain to carry, and was also more important than him. So, his first order of business was to find a stretcher. And his second order of business was to find 2 more stretchers. And all of this, almost as important as air on an airless planet, was having a sled on a sledless planet. Sort of sledless. Anyway, he was going to make a sled, and it was going to be awesome. 2 hours later, he had his sled and Boxy on it, along with 2 spare oxygen bottles, adding 3 hours each to his breathing time. Total breathing time left, 10 hours. Time before rescue, 3 days. After firing the emergency signal rocket, which was located somewhere. Steldal looked out over the dotted wreckage. He was going to die. He then found an awesome patch of flat, clear ice and did some super donuts. He was definitely going to die. Steldal woke up, looking at the staggering black sky. Millions of stars were visible, and that day there weren't any clouds. Technically, Enceladus hadn't had any clouds for over 500 million years, but for Steldal, it was a cloudless day somewhere in the Antarctic. Then he sat up and found himself on Enceladus. "Finger traps!" he shouted. His main oxygen tank was out, and he was down to 2 canisters. He used his communication sensor to find the ship's emergency transponder and flight data box. But as hard as he couldn't find the emergency signal rocket. Then, scrounging for another air canister, he found it. At least, the top of it. It had exploded. Its remaining transmitter head looked like a burnt, broken toy. The whole point of the rocket was to clear the magnetic fields crawling along the planet's surface and get to orbit before delivering its message. "Computer!" he shouted. His onboard computer responded, "Yes." He already knew the answer to his first question, but he asked anyway. "What is the maximum broadcasting range of my radio?" Military encrypted signal is a 6-kilometer radius, with power for 4 hours of use. The computer replied. "What about unencrypted radio? Emergency carrier wave, all frequencies?" he asked. 25 kilometers for 2 hours, it replied. "Closest relay. How far to the closest communications relay from here?" Steldal pressed. "The closest communications relay is 309 kilometers, directly due north," it said. "Computer, I need to get a high-frequency signal to that location, Steldal said. Can my equipment do that? Negative, the computer replied. You require a medium radio antenna and 40 watts of power for 8 seconds. Steldal strained his mind. Come on, think, he repeated to himself. Computer, he said. What's the next closest communications relay to this location? The computer responded in about 2 seconds. Relay Alpha 5, Sagittron Corp, Heavy Communications Hub. Distance 691 kilometers. And Steldal spoke right along with his computer at that moment. Directly due south, they both said. Then Steldal got an idea. Computer, when were these relays installed? 2109 to 2160, it replied. And why did it take so long to install them? He asked. Sagittron Corp was contracted to build a solid-state communications grid across the planet, the computer said. Solid-state? Nobody does that anymore. Steldal was finally doing some good. Computer, that old-school stuff means cables, right? Steldal reasoned. Fiber optic or copper, something like that. Correct, the computer said. 6-inch insulated copper cable. And how deep are those cables buried? Steldal asked. 20 meters below the surface, the computer replied. Steldal held up his sidearm and grinned. One full pistol charge should do it. Solid ice, straight down. But Steldal needed to be in the right place. Computer, I need you to show me a map. Show me where I am, and show me where that cable is. Affirmative, the computer said. Work in progress. That's okay, computer, Steldal said. Take all the time you want. An inadvertent byproduct of onboard suit computers was that, when stranded, soldiers frequently resorted to treating them like real people. Although not damaging psychologically, it was unflattering to families who wanted to know their loved ones' brave last words. It was often something like, "What do you mean the Mets weren't a likely contender?" Or, "Bacon isn't any more dangerous than eggs or milk, admit it." With about the same psychological effects as playing chess against yourself, Steldal was now about to come to terms with a computer's crucial limitation: available data. Steldal had actually found a tiny trench shovel in the wreckage, which delighted him tremendously. He was ready to dig, to cut into that big black cable and mess up some guy's Enceladus weather report. Today's forecast is no atmosphere with a 100% chance of ice everywhere and only ice. 10 minutes later, the computer still hadn't finished composing the relevant data onto the map. Computer, Steldal said, I need the exact location of that cable. All I see is a red blur. It's way too wide to be the correct location. Steldal paused. The computer paused. It was a bad sign. Computer, is it in the middle of the blur? I can pick that out, sort of, but you have to put down a line as close as you can. The cable is only like 6 inches across. I can't be off by 5 meters or 2 meters, or I'll never hit it. The computer finally replied, somewhat ominously. The cable is not at the center of the red region. Steldal was unimpressed. Well, then where the heck is it? Sagittron Corp, the computer began, was contracted to mitigate tectonic shifts directly around its cable lanes. There was a pause. Steldal pressed. So, the computer replied. The cable was laid in a sinusoidal pattern with an amplitude of 150 meters, east to west, in 1,000 kilometer stretches, So?
Steldal shouted.
Show me the cable, right here. The sine thing, it goes here, right? Data not entered.
It responded.
Data not... Steldal began to whimper. He fell to his knees, playing out his tragedy with hand gestures. He held up his pistol, sort of played out his plan to dig down, then he whimpered more, did a zigzag motion with his other hand, dropped his pistol, picked up his mini shovel, and then fell over and started to cry. I can program your visor antenna to detect copper masses,
the computer suggested.
What's the range?
Steldal whimpered.
1 meter,
the computer replied.
I hate you,
he said.
Steldal had dug a ramp tunnel exactly 20 meters deep, directly at the western edge of the red strip. He kept the last few seconds of his pistol charge ready for any sudden emergencies, like a tunnel collapse or unprompted words of encouragement from his computer. Then it was just a matter of digging directly east, as straight as his digital leveler could point him, 150 meters or sooner. Because, of course, it was all chance. The cable really was passing some point in the zone marked on his map, 20 meters under the surface. But at what point exactly was basically a 120-year mystery. Steldal crouched in the tunnel, raised his mini shovel, and then fell over. With his head resting on the ice, he said only, Computer, what's the closest distance to vodka? Carl Steldal was doing very important work, including the minding of Boxy, the neutronium power core, the stockpiling of one entire mini oxygen tank, and the close observation of his former ship's flight data recorder, all integrated synergistically on his mobile support platform. His sled. You should be digging, his computer insisted. No,
Steldal insisted.
I'm not digging 150 meters into solid ice. His computer continued to sell the idea. For every meter you dig forward, the probability of locating the cable increases 1.2%. And if you shut up, the probability of me being happy increases 1,000,000%, Steldal huffed. Then he found a small blue object on the ice. He grabbed it and lifted it up high, shouting as if to a crowd of spectators. I found a power cell! From a short distance away, it was clear there was no crowd. Over the next hour of sledding, Steldal also found a basic coupler and, at last, the crown of his wreckage kingdom, a broken medium antenna. Once he had assembled those things, he informed his computer of his winningness and cemented his victory with an unmistakable flurry of super donuts, double spin, no legsies, fall over queasies. Part 3. Getting cable. Steldal awoke from a pleasant nap. I'm sorry for your loss of consciousness,
his computer said.
Your crash may have caused irreparable brain damage. No,
Steldal said.
I'm fine. And you are going to love your new job,
he said to his computer, yanking it off his wrist.
Ow,
it said.
If you can detect copper with my visor antenna at 1 meter,
Steldal said.
Approximately,
his computer added.
Then you should be able to detect it much farther with this,
he said, holding up the new arrangement. His computer stated,
I am unexcited at this new opportunity.
Steldal connected his computer to the device and set it onto his sled.
And here we go,
he said, and pushed off. The mini monitor simply flashed from green to red, indicating interference.
He pushed himself and his artificial friends along no particular path, just veering around and listening to the slight changes and beeps which were made by the bent antenna contraption. It peaked when passing over a particular point. Steldal shouted, I think that's our cable. His computer replied. Digging should commence immediately. Nope, Steldal replied. We're not digging. We're following the cable. But the cable is in... Steldal cut his computer off. A zigzag. Whee! Steldal pushed off again. And in just a minute, we'll have to stop. Because... came the computer's question, but it had already computed the answer. Because of a crevasse, Steldal said, getting off of the sled and down onto his belly. He looked into the crevasse, 20 meters down. It was too dark to see, but he aimed straight down from his cobbled-together cable finder, lined up his last pistol blast, and fired. At the iceberg, Frost and a communications operator were discussing an unresponsive medevac. Did that ship's autopilot even respond to the hail? Frost inquired. It's passing through a high interference area, sir. It may not have even received the call. The comms lieutenant pointed to a map on the monitor. We won't get a lock on the ship until they reach these plains. Our satellites are trained on that location for when they reach it. That's if they reach it, Lieutenant, Frost stated. How long before they're supposed to be there? He asked. About 2 hours, the lieutenant replied. Well, let's just hope. Frost was interrupted by a faint beeping from a far terminal. The lieutenant wheeled his chair over and tapped on the screen. What was that? Frost inquired. Nothing, the lieutenant said, tapping on the screen. One of our old data cables just got damaged. Our contractor will fix it with a robot in a few weeks. Frost pressed the lieutenant with questions. How often does this cable damage happen, Lieutenant? Almost never, sir, but... Frost cut him off. Almost never my eye. Doesn't that cable cross the interference zone? Frost asked him. Yes, but it's in an unstable area, the lieutenant continued. Frost wasn't having any of it. What would happen if a soldier cut the data line at just one point? He asked. What would that look like? The lieutenant paused, confused. I guess it could look like this. Frost snapped into action. We have a Priority 1 rescue. Put a dropship on standby and alert all sleds within 6 hours range from... Lieutenant, you'd better be able to pinpoint that damage. Yes, sir. A-105 relay. Distance 309 kilometers south. Right here, sir, the lieutenant said. Frost continued with his orders. Lieutenant, refix our SATCAMs now. The lieutenant complied. Sir, he said, we have wreckage. Frost opened a line to the launch room. Frost to Launchmaster. Yes, Colonel, the Launchmaster said. Emergency rescue rocket, Frost ordered. 4 packs of oxygen, liquid water, food, a medical drone, and a thermal tent to these coordinates. You will launch immediately, copy? Yes, Colonel. 90 seconds, the Launchmaster replied as he backed behind a protective plate. Didn't it used to be 70 seconds, Launchmaster? The colonel inquired. The dolly bearings, sir, the Launchmaster replied, the rocket behind him already pre-igniting. The hiss over the comms rattled their speakers. Frost concluded their exchange. 90 seconds is outstanding, Launchmaster. We'll get those dolly bearings replaced ASAP. Yes, Colonel. Any time, sir, he said. The front of the IceSat-5 rocket, moving at 800 miles an hour, dipped its nose to the horizon, unbuffeted by clouds or dust. It would reach Private Carl Steldal in 12 minutes. When it did, he would be asleep on his sled.